Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. It's 11 a.m. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We will be joined by Henna Hundal, who is the host of the Henna Hundal Show on Harvard Radio Broadcasting. It is a nationally syndicated news program. She has spent quite a bit of time interviewing presidential candidates for the upcoming presidential elections, amongst many other guests as well. So we will do kind of a deep dive into Henna's interviews and stories and what she's learned along the way in the last, I think, 6 years that she's been doing the show. So please stay tuned. She will be joining us very shortly. If you are a longtime listener, you know that we always reserve just the first few minutes of the show to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the scope of financial literacy in the Houston and the Gulf Coast area. So we are here at KPFT. We are community-sponsored radio, and so we are in the last Friday of the Winter Fund Drive. So I always like to remind people, one of the ways that this show remains free and open to the public, we never charge anything, is by listeners supporting and volunteers. We are a volunteer-run radio station. So if you like what you hear, one of the ways that we keep the lights on is to leave a tip. Go to kpft.org, hit the tip jar, and please contribute to our Winter Fund Drive. It is how we keep this station open. If you've never been to the station here, we are a house that was actually donated by a listener. I am in one of the rooms. It's been converted into a studio, and it's been going for many years, and we are strong. So with that, let's kind of get into the calendar here. Houston Hispanic Forum Career and Education Day. So you've heard me kind of talk about that in the last few shows. This is happening. It's happening tomorrow morning. It is, I want to say, 9 o'clock is when it kicks off. I'd encourage people to go to Houston Hispanic Forum .org to find out more. Houston Money Week, which I am on the leadership team. We have participated in this for the last 4 to 5 years. I think this will be our 5th year. And we've kind of piggybacked on it. And this event is a great event each year that they have it. If you've been to the George R. Brown Convention Center, you know that this is a giant facility that takes up multiple city blocks. We fill up about half of that with high school students, junior high students, parents who want to learn more about college planning, who want to sit down and pick the brain of a profession that they might be interested in. And so we in the past, they've had law enforcement, but like the FBI, forensic laboratories. They've had STEM research out there as well. Many different professions where the students actually get to sit down and bounce questions off of them and kind of get to see what a day in the life is. Really cool event. I am going to be doing a college planning talk. Win Fong, who is also part of Houston Money Week, and Danny Harvey as well will be out there. I believe my talk is at noon. But this is free. It's open to the public, and you can go to HoustonHispanicForum.org. With that, let's go ahead and get Henna on the line here so we can maximize our time that we have with her. Henna, are you there? Henna, can you hear me?
I am here.
Oh,
Hello.
perfect. Okay. So there was a delay there for a second. It's like, uh-oh. Well, great. Well, thank you for joining the show today. I always kind of start the show the same way. I'll share your bio with listeners so that they can get to know you a little bit better. And you are the host of the Henna Hundal Show, and it is a nationally syndicated news program launched from the studios of Harvard Radio Broadcasting. The show features the world's foremost experts for groundbreaking discussion within their respective fields, spanning medicine, science, technology, business, politics, policy, law, and more. You are on a mission to unpack and understand how contemporary high-impact issues are being tackled by the world's most influential leaders. Henna, thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's my pleasure to be on. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you.
What can you tell us about yourself that's outside of the bio so that listeners can get to know you just a little bit better?
Yeah, so, I grew up in a small agricultural town in the heart of California's Central Valley, which is sort of diametrically different from the work that I do now. I mean, it's I grew up fairly isolated in a small community, on a farm, on an almond farm. So it was a really 180-degree difference to go to Harvard and to start this program there that now has sort of taken its own form and has been really wonderful because I've gotten to chat with some really, really incredible people. And it's sort of never what I imagined my life would be, given the rural environment that I grew up in. So that's sort of a little caveat to what listeners might take away from me from just that bio.
Absolutely. And I looked at all of the different shows that you've had in the past, and we can really kind of go anywhere with it because you've talked to quite a few different people. One of the things that you've been doing recently for the upcoming election is interviewing presidential candidates. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so at the start of 2019, I set out with the goal of interviewing as many of the 2020 U.S. presidential candidates that I could on both the Democrat and Republican side. And part of this goal was, when you see these candidates on a debate stage, it's very easy for the messages to get lost on the viewers. Just sort of everything now is how you present, and those sound bites and those clippable moments that are then posted on social media and retweeted and shared and favorited. And it's sort of hard to get at any substance to really understand what the candidates' policies are about and how they compare to one another. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to as many of the candidates as I could and try to compare their policies. So I asked relatively the same types of questions to each of the candidates. And because I'm a member of Generation Z, which is set to comprise 10% of the electorate in the upcoming presidential election, I'm really interested in understanding if there's been an impact in sort of a lot of the youth movements that we've seen, arise around the country, such as around climate change, around the opioid epidemic, if we can see that reflected in the rhetoric and the policies that the candidates are proposing. And what's been really interesting to see is that I do find a sort of mirroring of what youth are asking for and how that's really been incorporated in the way that the candidates are trying to campaign. There's been some really interesting conversations I've had. For example, I interviewed Andrew Yang early last year when he just announced his candidacy, and he's been, talking about universal basic income, or the idea that every, person, the age of 18 and over, should receive $1,000 per month. As a way to sort of start, heat up the economy. So it's been that's a sort of clear appeal to youth or recent college graduates. So it's been really interesting to be on the campaign trail to see what these candidates are about and to try to approach this from a different lens than I guess what you would get on, mainstream news.
Absolutely. And I'm looking through just a list of all of the different guests that you've had on the show before. Now, one of the guests that you had was Bill Gates. What was that like?
Oh, that was really incredible. I got the chance to go up to his office and interview him in person. And first of all, it was just, an awe-inspiring experience. He's a really, really humble guy. Initially I was a little bit nervous for that conversation just because, he he's a man of so many talents and has really seen a lot. And so I knew he could offer insight on such a wide variety of topics. So I was really careful to try to winnow down my line of inquiry to make sure I made the most of the time that I had with him in terms of having a great conversation. And we chatted about his annual letter, which he releases every year, him and Melinda from the foundation. And they sort of talk about what surprised them that year, what they learned about doing their humanitarian work abroad. So we got the chance to chat about, girls' education, his investments in HIV/AIDS efforts around the world, and a lot of that was great because it dovetailed off of my personal work. I've done research on HIV and AIDS both from a laboratory and a public health perspective, so to be able to sit down with him and try to understand what are the metrics that you use when you're trying to invest in different interventions around the world, that sort of came back and informed my own work in my corner. But even broader than that, I mean, it was really amazing to chat with him about how he sort of transformed his approach to life when he transitioned from his work in Microsoft to now his philanthropy, which he does pretty much full time.
I love that. I love that. Going back to the presidential candidates that you've interviewed, I know a lot of different themes came up. One of the ones you just mentioned was the universal basic income. What about medicine or health? Did that come up during any of the interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked, I've been talking with a lot of the candidates about the opioid epidemic. And Representative Tim Ryan from Ohio's 13th Congressional District, he's since dropped out, but he was a really important figure, I think, early in the campaign season in bringing this issue to light because, as we know, Ohio has been particularly hard hit by the opioid epidemic. I've also interviewed a former governor of Ohio, Governor Ted Strickland, who did a lot of work in trying to figure out how to alleviate that crisis. And what's been really interesting in talking to a lot of these candidates about the opioid epidemic is that you're starting to see a more of a top-down approach. That is to say, there's a family called the Sackler family, affiliated with Purdue Pharma, whom we now know to have played a role in spreading this crisis across the country. I mean, there was a lot of manipulative marketing tactics that took hold in getting people addicted. And so what's been interesting is that, when I talked to Andrew Yang, I talked to the recently dropped out John Delaney. He dropped out just before the Iowa caucuses. He made a really strong case for seeking prison terms for these big pharma executives who have played a role in bringing the opioid crisis to what it is. And that's really interesting. I mean, when I talked to Representative Delaney, he said, I don't think it's enough that we can just expect, these people to pay fines. We need to, ensure that we're going to see changed behavior henceforth. And, I've talked to the National Press Secretary for Bernie Sanders, and, she said, yes, Senator Sanders is really in support of, making sure that justice is applied equally across the country. And that means not just to the kid who steals a pack of gum from, the dollar store around the corner, but also for these big hotshot executives who for a long time have felt sort of immune to the applications or equal applications of the law. And so you see a really justice-oriented rhetoric that a lot of these presidential candidates are using around issues like the opioid epidemic or issues like healthcare reform, saying things like it's the right thing to do, right? And that's sort of a departure from the more economically focused language around healthcare that I think we've seen in previous presidential elections.
I know specifically with the opioid crisis, it's one of these issues that has become nonpartisan. I mean, you see both sides of the aisle really kind of bringing it up, talking about it, and so it has been a big focus. As you've interviewed these different candidates, and your interview style is kind of like mine. It's conversational. We're not looking for concise sound bites. You're actually able to go in depth with these interviewees here. Were there any? What was the most surprising thing of these different people that you interviewed?
Yeah, I guess it would be how open they were to talking about a lot of these issues. First of all, with a youth, which I think speaks volumes about sort of how they're thinking about what this election might mean. and that, there's sort of new demographics. For the first time, a lot of Gen Zers are now going to be able to vote. And as I mentioned, they're going to represent 10% of the electorate come November. So I think it's been really surprising. First of all, when I started the series, I didn't know how much they would take to me, how much they would be interested in speaking with me, and because through me, you sort of reach a younger, millennial, Gen Z demographic. But their willingness to do so, I think, has been probably the most surprising thing, because I think it signals sort of how people are thinking about what they need and sort of who they need to appeal to win this upcoming election. And I think that's, a departure from 2016, where, quite frankly, Secretary Clinton, there's been lots of reports about how she didn't visit certain states or perhaps ignored certain demographics and, made these miscalculations. And I think now a lot of these candidates are understanding that they're going to need to take a wider approach and find a message that appeals to a more broad array of people.
I love it, and just them taking the time to go through the interview process it is more of a focus than what we've seen in the past with Gen Z or with the younger demographic. So that's positive. That's a good thing. I'm going to pivot just a little bit, because when I was doing the research on the show, one of the things that I found was you had made a speech when you were in 5th grade. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I went to an elementary school that had a competition every year called the Speech Meet. And so you would, audition, you would give a speech. Either you would memorize a poem or a piece of prose, or you would write your own. And you would deliver whatever you had memorized, and then they would sort of pick the winners. And then they would go on to the county level to compete. And I remember, sort of waving it off, not really sure if I was even going to participate that year because it was optional. And then on a whim, I decided at the last minute to write up a small little corny segment about, my times with friends. It was a comical little piece, and I delivered it. And by some miracle, I won the school speech meet, and so this was in 5th grade. And it sort of ignited something within me, because I never considered myself to be, I guess, a gifted orator or have explored that side of myself in any way. But for some reason, when I delivered that, when I won that, when I saw the feedback, when I sort of saw what my words, the effect that they could have, right, that I could stand up in front of the class, I could deliver, something that I had written, and it would translate through smiles and laughter and emotion and, heartfelt reactions among the listeners. It really sort of illustrated to me the power of speech and how we can use our words for good or for bad. And so I decided in that moment that I would use my words for good. And that, I guess, was really the genesis of my interest in any sort of broadcasting. And, fast forward to now, this is what I'm doing full-time, broadcasting.
I love it. And here you are interviewing Bill Gates and John Delaney and the whole slew of the presidential candidates there. Let's talk about the interviews that you've had in the past on medicine and science, because I also have a list of really big names there. Did you have some of those that kind of stand out to you?
Yeah, and a lot of the ones that stick in my memory do so not just for what I thought we would talk about, but I think what's really beautiful about radio and sort of why I love this medium is that it's just really real, right? It's really raw. It's stripped down. It's sort of like, when you're listening to it in your car, it's like your friend is speaking to you behind your shoulder. It's really, absent of the lights, camera, action, flash, flare, smoke, and mirrors of television and other mediums. I think radio is just so real and raw. And what that leads to is a lot of great conversations or spin-offs from conversations that you don't even plan for. You can't plan for them. So, for example, I interviewed Dr. Martin Chaffee, who was a co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2008. And, I anticipated going into that conversation that we would talk strictly about his research. He's a professor still. But we ended up sort of taking a deep dive into, how his wife was really instrumental in his research and how sort of he had to borrow some of her research to complement his own. And then, he told a really funny story about how when he needed to borrow some of his wife's data for his work in order for it to get published, she made a list of stipulations for him, like, you will serve me dinner once a week, you'll take out the trash more often, and in exchange you can have this data for your research. And that data ended up being critical for him to winning the Nobel Prize. So, that's actually the moments that I really treasure, when you sort of take this tangent and have these organic conversations that you can't and don't plan for. And I think those are actually what stick in your memory the most.
I love it. I love it. Now, you recently graduated from Harvard. Is that correct?
I did, yes. I graduated in May of 2019. I studied human developmental and regenerative biology, which is essentially stem cell biology. And I did research at the Harvard Stem Cell Institute on fructose absorption and diabetes, type 2 diabetes.
So I know we have a lot of people who are interested in getting started in broadcasting. You have been putting the show on for quite some time, and you also completed your degree. Do you have any tips for people who are trying to get into broadcasting but they don't have that balance? What would you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. Start small, right? Like the show wasn't at this level. When I first started it, I started it as a freshman out of the studios of Harvard Radio Broadcasting. That's where I launched it. And, I just had fun. I remember starting off, I just interviewed my friends, I interviewed my roommate. So I sort of approached it with the idea that everybody has a story, and everybody has something to share, and everybody's their own teacher and their own expert on their life, and we can all sort of learn from, each other's experiences. And so that's where I started. I started, at one station, interviewing the people closest to me and trying to learn about them from a different perspective. So in a way, I kind of started it for me, for self-fulfillment, and just to sort of learn about my friends a little bit more. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And, I didn't even know by the time I graduated, I thought, well, I might, have to end the show now because I'm leaving Harvard, so I'm leaving Harvard Radio. And then by blessings, it turned into what it is now, and now that it's syndicated, I'm able to continue. And so I think the point is that there was a lot of growth there. I didn't start out syndicated on these many stations. I didn't start out interviewing, Bill Gates, for example. I started out interviewing my roommates. So you really have to start small, and especially if you're, simultaneously working toward a degree or working full-time, start small and then sort of see where it goes. And the more the more episodes I taped, the more I really got into the show while I was studying simultaneously for my degree. I realized that this is something I wanted to do, full time eventually, and I didn't know that when I started, which I think was actually a really good thing because it enabled me to start off just having fun. So I think if anyone's seeking to get into broadcasting but also has a full time gig, start it off as a passion project, and then see if it's something that you actually want to take further, because there's always room for growth.
I love it. I think that's great advice there. I was going to ask you now that you've graduated, if you will continue to do the show, but you went ahead and answered. You mentioned that's in the scope of possibility, or the realm of possibilities there.
Yeah. I've had the best conversations. To me, it's sort of like I have small audio snippets of the best conversations I ever had. Just was if one were to have Polaroid pictures or an Instagram feed capturing, in pictorial form, the best moments that they've ever had in their life. I have a collection of the best conversations I've ever had in my life. And sometimes I'll go back and I'll listen to them again, and I learn different things each time. I learn something new while I'm interviewing the person, and I learn something new as I re-listen to the conversation. And I think the best part is that I'm not an expert in a lot of the subjects that I speak with people about. I speak with a lot of people involved in diplomacy and education and humanitarianism, and I get to learn from them, and the audience gets to learn from them. And I think that's the exciting part, is that you don't have to be an expert, but you get to speak with the experts, and then you get to translate that knowledge in a way that's meaningful and comprehensible to ordinary people. And that's what makes it such an exciting and fulfilling project, where I'm so happy to be continuing it.
I love it. For people who are just joining in, we just talked about some of the tips that you would give to people who are interested in getting started in this, and you said start small. I would totally agree with that. The other one that you mentioned was have fun. So you started with your friends, and then, fast forward, now you're you're interviewing Bill Gates there, and we're, far in the future there, and you're syndicated on many different radio stations as well. And one of the things that you talked about was you don't have to be an expert on that specific topic, that you can come in, you can have people interview them. And so I love that. I would think that would be inspiring for somebody who was thinking about getting started in broadcasting. Let's go back to the presidential candidates that you had interviewed there. Other than the universal basic income, were there any other finance topics or even entrepreneurship that came up during those interviews?
Yeah, and there's been a really interesting twist on a lot of these topics, I think, in this election that we haven't seen in presidential politics of the past decade. And I can highlight a couple. So, they've since dropped out, but I really hope that their economics message is absorbed by the candidates still in the field. And that's the message of Representative John Delaney, who, when I chatted with him, he was in the middle of his Heartland startup tour in Iowa. And he's a self-described centrist, but he talked a lot about the need to reinvigorate the American heartland and to sort of bring the fruits of innovation that we see from the tech companies on the coast and to translate that into job opportunities for Americans in the heartland. And that's really actually in a way related to the message of Andrew Yang, who has a great elevator pitch. So when I interviewed him, this was, as soon as he announced his candidacy, and his sort of elevator pitch, because at that time, he sort of came out of the gate, nobody knowing who he was or why he decided to enter the race. And so I asked him, who are you and why are you in this race? And great elevator pitch. He said, I'm running as a problem solver. I'm running to solve the problems that got Donald Trump elected in the first place. And that is, and I'm paraphrasing him, but that is that we've since, automated away about 4 million manufacturing jobs. And as a person in the tech industry, I know that we're about to do that to millions of service jobs. And so this idea of understanding how technology and automation are affecting the economy, I think, is a new twist to the economic message of a lot of these candidates. And I'm sort of waiting to hear that more and more from the candidates that are still left in the field. Andrew's still left in the field, but I think Representative Delaney did a lot of work in highlighting just how much we need to make sure to transfer the boons of our innovation to the American heartland. So that's sort of been the really interesting dimension to the economics messaging that I've seen in this election.
I love it, and those themes of technology and automation and the positives, but also the negatives of that. You talked about that kind of theme of moving the technology that's from the coast to reinvigorating the heartland there. Very unique ways to think about that hopefully will be adopted by the rest of the candidates. We'll see some more talk on our integration into their platforms there. We've got just 2 minutes before the show's over. What have I forgot to ask you that you would like to leave the listeners with today?
Well, this was such a great conversation. I really enjoyed this. And, I would just say to any listener, pay attention. This is a really, really important presidential election. No matter who you support or what side of the aisle you're on, I think it's really important just to be involved and to care. We've had in the past 2 decades really historic lows in terms of voter turnout and civic participation. And I think that's really disheartening. And so I would just say to anybody, listen to the interviews I have on my website, check out the candidates' interviews on other platforms, check out their social media, which is actually a really interesting way to get a raw and real look at the candidates, because they can tweet, without the middleman of the media and sort of, give their view as it is. And so if these candidates are tweeting up a firestorm, you'll find most days. So pay attention, get involved. I want to bring back this, excitement around civic participation. I think it's really critical. And no matter what team you're on, what side you're on, I think, you really just have to pay attention and understand that this election is super important. And and the outcomes of it really do touch all of our lives, even if it's not immediately felt. I think that's often the perception that,
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.